Hi, this is Allison from threesistersfabric.com. This is the second video I'm making on how we handle side borders around here. I did a first initial video on the ABC method of borders and corners, and that was how to handle the tops and the bottom borders. And now I have these two videos here, side borders 101 and side borders 102. 102 is covering chunking, and this is a little bit more complicated to explain right at first, but some people really prefer this method because they do not like to turn a quilt. It's really not very difficult. It's probably just, I don't know, sometimes I think it's easier to just turn the quilt and stitch the border out all in one motion, but if you don't like to turn a quilt, this is the way to go. First of all, you're going to have to be prepared with some measurements. You need to know what size your quilt is, and especially what the length of your quilt is, because the length of your quilt is going to be rolled up onto your frame and you can't get to it very easily at this point. So be prepared with the length of your quilt. Also, what you can see here is on the CAD, I've got the top border laid out with my corner patterns in place. If you can imagine what this would be like turned on its side, this is what you are going, this space right in here is what you are going to be left with to fill on your side borders as you chunk down them. And so this measurement is going to be pretty critical to figure out how many repeats you need and what size they need to be. To get that measurement, I measure from the top, from the one edge of my quilt to the start of this pattern. That's your critical dimension, is where that pattern actually stops quilting. In this case, I'm going to use Alt-M to do my measurement. Oftentimes in the real quilting world, I'll just use a tape measure to get this measurement. So I'm going to measure from right here. I'm going to put my end snap on, and I'm going to measure to the actual end of that pattern. And down here I can see that it is 7.53 inches. I'm going to write that down right now so that I can remember it. 7.53 inches. And then, whoops, over here, I'm going to take another measurement. I'm going to measure from this end, turn my end snap back off again, over to the edge of the quilt again. And that measurement is 6.22 inches. Okay, so that is the space between the start and ends of the patterns. So my quilt length, I happen to know my quilt length is 56 inches overall. Bring up my little calculator here. So my quilt length is 56 inches. Then I'm going to subtract the distance over here, which was 7.53. And I'm also going to subtract the distance over here, which was 6.22. That gives me a total space to fill of 42.25 inches on my side borders. I want to remember that number because I'm going to need it to set up my side borders for chunking. Also, I like to remember that quilts shrink as you go down them usually. So generally speaking, I will take off, if that measurement was 42.25, I usually like to subtract about an inch, sometimes 2 inches if it's a very long quilt. In this case, I'm just going to subtract an inch and make it 41.25 inches. Get rid of that calculator here. Okay, it's not a very hard thing to do from this point forward. Okay, you'll notice I have a new quilt group here now. I called it chunking. Sometimes I call it side borders. You can call it whatever you want, just so long as you can refer back to it again and again as you scroll down or roll down the side of your quilt. I am in standalone mode here doing this demonstration, so my two borders, my two side borders here are awful close together, and but it will serve for the demonstration purposes. Anyhow, I have a border here on the left side, I have a border here on the right side. We did our measurements already, and we know that between the two corner patterns there is going to be 42 or 42¼ inches to fill. We are subtracting 1 inch to allow for shrinkage, which gives us a total of 41¼ inches that we want to fill down the sides. To do that, I go into repeat pattern mode, okay, and I go to my total width. The actual height of my border, the simple feather border pattern, was already set to match the quilt size. And in this case I want the total width because we're going to set this part of the pattern that goes this way, but we're going to use the square up angle to determine which way the pattern runs. So here at the total width, I'm going to put that dimension, 41.25. You want to make sure that start end control is on. Okay, and then on the square up angle, I'm going to put in one simple figure here. 90 degrees. 90 degrees takes care of the left side of the quilt. And when I hit OK, there it goes. This particular pattern runs in a clockwise direction. And I'm going to move it over here just to get it out of the way for when I place the other one. Anyhow, but those would be the repeats that we need to run between the border corners. Of course, we're not going to be able to, you can see how much room I have to quilt with. We're not going to be able to fit the whole thing in one pass. But then I want to set up for the other border as well. Again, my total width is 41¼ Start end control is on. Whoops, I don't want a bobbin pull up there. We want to connect the start and ends. The square up angle for the right side of the quilt when a border pattern is running in a clockwise direction is 270. Put that in, I hit OK, and there's the borders running this way. So it is 90 degrees for the left side of the quilt, 270 degrees for the right side of the quilt. I keep that on a little piece of paper taped to my monitor so I can plug those figures in very quickly and very easily. Anyhow, these patterns are all right here and they are ready to be used, but I am going to toggle them sewn so that certain ones don't get stitched out that shouldn't. That will cause a problem. Okay, now if you've noticed, I placed a couple of corner patterns on my CAD here. They are imaginary patterns for me on the screen, okay, and for you. In actuality, the corners are on your quilt. You can't see them on the screen. So what I like to do to be sure I know exactly where I need to line my border up with the corner pattern is I use a point-to-point line. Okay, on the screen, because I am in standalone, I'm going to say Alt-L, and I'm going to use an end snap. Now you will be on your Statler, so you are going to use point-to-point line. You're going to take the head of your machine and you're going to find exactly where that corner pattern had started last time. Look for the tie-off. Okay, go out to the side here, make a little check. I like to do the check mark again because it gives you something that you can really grab a hold of. Then I'm going to go over here and do the same thing. I'm going to find exactly where that pattern stops stitching. I'm going to go out, I'm going to make a little check mark. Okay, now I can delete these two patterns because we really don't need them there anymore. Alright, because actually that's all you're going to see on your screen. Alright, those corners were on the quilt, not on the screen. Alright, and now I'm going to drag this pattern because I'm only going to be able to fit one repeat. I can't fit two. I'm going to drag this pattern and this pattern right down here to fit. Okay, and it needs to go somewhere right around in here. I'm going to change to my F11, my end snaps here. Put end snap on and snap it to that point right there. And then I'm going to use this side. I'm turning end snap off. I'm going to tip it so it fits right. These borders are really out of whack. Alright. I'm going to use, whoops, I hit F8. I'm going to use F9 to get myself close to the starting point of that pattern. Switch to F11, my end snap handles. And I'm going to snap this end right there to the pattern. And then I'm going to go over here and take end snap off, and I'm going to rotate this so it fits real nice in that border. Be very careful that you don't stretch it out, because if you stretch it out, you're going to change your measurements on as far as the overall pattern goes. Alright, let's toggle this sewn and toggle this sewn. And then these patterns are ready to stitch out. The next time you roll your quilts, you'll do the same thing with the check mark again. You'll make a check mark where this one stopped and started, check mark where this one stopped and started, and then you can just take your next repeat. I like to use a fresh repeat every time, because if you did alter anything on this pattern, at least you know you've got your original dimensions back again. Something else I like to consider too, if you notice, this had originally made 4 repeats. It was a 1 here, 2, 3, and 4 repeats. After I get done with about half the quilt, sometimes 3/4 of the quilt, depending on how long it is. In this case, I would definitely do half the quilt. I like to go with a tape measure then, and I like to measure from the last end point of the border I did, and measure down. I unroll some of my quilt and I measure down to where that corner is, just to see if my measurements are still coming up pretty close. You should be able to use Alt-M and measure from this end snap to that end snap and see if your dimension is actually pretty close to what you have left on the quilt. If it's not, I would highly recommend selecting those 2 patterns, switch over to, whoops, sorry about that, selecting those 2 patterns, switch over to F9 and make it shorter or longer. Make your adjustment now. Don't wait for that last repeat. It will be a pill. Sometimes I've had some pretty wild surprises left at the very end, and it's too late to correct it with 1 repeat. If you have 2, you can kind of get something done, but if you have only 1 repeat left, there's not a lot you can do, because you're either going to have to drastically stretch or drastically shrink, and you'll see it and your customers will see it too. But if you have any further questions, go ahead and send me an email. Visit my website. There's a contact me link on there, and I'd be happy to hear from you.